Stay back, rookie. You're about to make this worse. The words cracked across the morning air, just as every radio in the parking lot seemed to come alive at once. Officer Ava Brooks stopped beside her patrol vehicle, one hand resting on the strap of her duty bag. Across the street, red and blue lights flashed against the glass windows of a small convenience store, painting the sidewalk in restless colors. Several officers stood behind their cruisers, their attention fixed on the front entrance. A man inside had refused to leave after closing time, and what should have been a routine call had somehow turned into the most talked-about incident in the district before 8 o'clock in the morning. Ava watched quietly as Sergeant Cole Harris barked instructions to the officers around him. His voice carried confidence, the kind built from years of being obeyed without question. Beside him stood Officer Ryan Walker, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the easy smirk of someone who believed he was always the smartest person in the room. Neither man recognized Ava. Neither seemed interested in learning her name. To them, she was simply another transfer. Another rookie. Another face in a department that had seen dozens come and go. Ava stepped closer to the command line and studied the storefront. The fluorescent lights inside flickered unevenly. A nervous clerk stood near the register speaking with dispatch through a cell phone. Through the reflection on the glass, Ava noticed something most of the others appeared to miss. The man inside wasn't pacing. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't causing damage. He remained seated near the back wall, shoulders low, gaze fixed on the floor. The scene didn't look dangerous. It looked complicated. "Sir," Ava said calmly, directing her words toward Cole, "maybe we should slow things down and try a different approach." Several officers turned toward her. Ryan let out a short laugh. "A different approach?" he asked. "You've been here, what, 10 minutes?" A few nearby officers chuckled. Ava remained still. "I'm just saying he doesn't appear aggressive." Ryan shook his head. "And I'm saying that's why rookies shouldn't run operations." More laughter followed. Cole didn't even look at her. "Stay behind the line, officer. Watch and learn." Ava nodded once. No argument. No frustration. Just quiet observation. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby diner. Traffic crawled past the intersection. Pedestrians slowed to watch. Somewhere overhead, a helicopter crossed the pale North Carolina sky. The city continued moving while tension settled over the scene like a heavy blanket. Ava glanced once more toward the store. Something about the man's posture bothered her. Not because it seemed threatening, because it seemed familiar, like someone carrying a burden no one else could see. "He's trying to tell us something," she said softly. Ryan rolled his eyes. "And now she's a psychologist." More chuckles. Ava looked away from them and back toward the building. The flashing lights reflected in her dark eyes. She had spent years learning when to speak and when silence carried more power. Today felt like one of those moments. Around her, officers continued preparing as if they already knew exactly how the next few minutes would unfold. None of them noticed the woman standing quietly among them. None of them noticed the calm certainty in her expression. And none of them had the slightest idea that by the end of the day, every badge in the department would answer directly to her. The standoff ended 23 minutes later without incident. The man inside the store walked out peacefully after speaking with a crisis counselor over the phone. The clerk was safe. The customers who had been waiting outside returned to their routines. News vans packed up and left. Yet as officers congratulated one another near the patrol vehicles, Ava could not ignore the uncomfortable feeling that settled in her chest. The situation had worked out, but not because of the plan everyone had celebrated. It had worked out because the man inside had chosen cooperation on his own. Ryan accepted praise as if the outcome had been guaranteed from the start. Several younger officers gathered around him while he replayed the story with increasing confidence. Every version made him sound a little more heroic. Cole stood nearby sipping coffee from a paper cup, nodding along. Neither man acknowledged Ava. Neither seemed interested in hearing the observations she had tried to offer earlier. By 10 o'clock that morning, the entire department had returned to headquarters. The station occupied an aging brick building near downtown Charlotte. Its hallways carried the scent of old paper, fresh coffee, and decades of history. Framed photographs lined the walls. Retired captains stared down from polished frames. Commendations covered entire sections of the corridor. Ava entered quietly carrying a single cardboard file box. A few officers glanced her way before returning to their conversations. Others barely looked up. She moved through the station with calm confidence, but she could feel the weight of curious eyes following her. The new transfer had already become a topic of discussion. She overheard fragments as she passed. She came from Washington. No idea why she transferred. Probably looking for an easier assignment. The comments were not openly hostile. They were worse. Dismissive. Ava reached a vacant desk near the back of the bullpen. Dust coated the surface. Someone had stacked outdated training manuals in one corner. A broken desk lamp leaned sideways like it had given up years ago. Ryan walked by and stopped just long enough to glance at the setup. "Looks perfect for a rookie," he said. A few nearby officers laughed. Ava smiled politely and began organizing her files. Ryan waited for a reaction. None came. His grin faded slightly before he continued down the aisle. Across the room, Officer Megan Ellis watched the exchange from her workstation. Unlike most of the others, she looked uncomfortable. She finally stood and approached Ava. "Do not take it personally," Megan said quietly. "They do this to everyone new." Ava slid a folder into a drawer. "Do they?" Megan hesitated. "Maybe not exactly like this." Their eyes met for a brief moment. No further explanation was necessary. Ava understood. Megan understood that Ava understood. The conversation ended there. Shortly before lunch, a department-wide email appeared on every computer screen. Mandatory leadership briefing. Attendance required. Conference room. 2 o'clock sharp. Groans immediately spread across the bullpen. Officers complained about paperwork. Detectives complained about schedules. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Probably another speech about budget cuts," he said. Cole laughed. "Or another presentation from someone who has never worked a real case." Around them, conversations resumed. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody noticed Ava reading the same email in complete silence. Sunlight streamed through the station windows, casting long golden rectangles across the floor. Outside, traffic moved steadily through the city streets. Inside, the department carried on as though it were an ordinary day. Ava closed her laptop gently and looked toward the conference room at the end of the hallway. For a moment, her expression softened. Then she returned to her work while the countdown toward 2 o'clock quietly continued. For a moment, the room seemed to forget how to breathe. Ryan Walker stared toward the back row, certain he had misheard what the deputy chief had said. Cole Harris slowly lowered his coffee cup onto the table without taking his eyes off Ava Brooks. Around them, officers exchanged stunned glances. A few looked toward the deputy chief. Others looked back at Ava as if seeing her for the first time. Ava rose calmly from her chair and closed the black folder in front of her. There was no triumph in her expression. No satisfaction. No sign that she had been waiting for this moment all day. She simply stepped into the aisle and walked toward the front of the conference room. The sound of her shoes crossing the polished floor seemed unusually loud in the silence. Ryan felt heat rise into his face as memories from the morning replayed in his mind. The comments, the jokes, the dismissive smiles. Every moment suddenly felt heavier than it had only minutes earlier. Ava reached the front of the room and shook Deputy Chief Bennett's hand. The deputy chief smiled warmly. "Welcome to District 7, Captain Brooks." A few officers offered polite applause. Others joined in a moment later. The applause spread through the room, uneven at first, then stronger. Ava thanked the deputy chief and turned toward the audience. Sunlight reflected from the conference room windows behind her, outlining her silhouette against the bright afternoon sky. She waited patiently until the room became quiet again. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "I know unexpected leadership changes can create uncertainty. I understand that. I have been the new person before." Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ava continued, "I am not here to change everything overnight. I am here to support good officers, strengthen community trust, and make sure every member of this department has the tools they need to succeed." The words were simple, but the sincerity behind them filled the room. Even officers who had never met her found themselves listening carefully. Ava did not mention the morning. She did not mention being ignored. She did not mention the comments. Instead, she spoke about teamwork, responsibility, and service. The absence of bitterness made Ryan feel even worse. After the meeting concluded, groups of officers slowly filed toward the exits. Conversations erupted throughout the room. Some discussed Ava's resume. Others searched their phones for information about her previous assignments. Megan Ellis approached Ava first and introduced herself properly. Ava greeted her warmly. One by one, other officers followed. Ryan remained seated. He watched from across the room as Ava spoke with detectives, supervisors, and patrol officers. She treated everyone exactly the same. No special attention. No coldness. No scorekeeping. Eventually, only a handful of people remained. Cole stood and adjusted his uniform. "I suppose we should introduce ourselves again," he muttered. Ryan gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah." Together they crossed the room. Ava noticed them approaching and offered a professional smile. Ryan opened his mouth, searching for the right words, but none seemed good enough. Before he could speak, a dispatcher hurried through the doorway carrying a stack of reports. "Captain Brooks," she called. "We have a developing situation downtown. Command wants an immediate briefing." Ava accepted the reports and scanned the first page. Her expression grew thoughtful. Outside the conference room windows, dark clouds had begun gathering above the city skyline. The bright afternoon sunlight faded behind a curtain of gray. Ava looked up from the documents and toward the officers standing in front of her. "Looks like we have work to do," she said quietly. Within 15 minutes, the command room was full again. A large digital map glowed across the front wall, covering the city in layers of streets, traffic feeds, and emergency response zones. Rain tapped softly against the windows as the afternoon sky darkened. Officers filled the seats with notebooks open and radios resting beside them. The atmosphere felt different now. Nobody was joking. Nobody was distracted. Ava stood near the center of the room, studying the reports that had arrived moments earlier. A community outreach festival scheduled for that evening had suddenly become a logistical challenge after severe weather forecasts forced organizers to relocate thousands of attendees into a smaller downtown venue. Traffic concerns, staffing shortages, and public safety coordination now rested on the department's shoulders. It was not a crisis, but it was exactly the kind of operation that revealed whether a leadership team could function under pressure. Ava listened as supervisors presented updates. She asked concise questions. She took notes. She encouraged input from every division. The room gradually settled into a productive rhythm. Then Ryan spoke. "We should keep the original deployment plan." Several heads turned toward him. Ryan stood confidently. "The weather reports are being exaggerated. We move resources now, we waste manpower. We should wait." A few officers nodded. Others looked uncertain. Ava reviewed the forecast packet in front of her. "The National Weather Service predicts conditions will deteriorate within 2 hours," she said calmly. Ryan crossed his arms. "Predictions are not guarantees." The room became quiet. Ava studied him for a moment. "Do you have data supporting your recommendation?" Ryan hesitated. "Experience." Ava nodded politely. "Experience matters. Data matters too." The discussion moved forward, but tension lingered beneath the surface. Over the next hour, preparations continued. Additional officers were assigned. Traffic routes were adjusted. Emergency shelters were coordinated. Ava remained focused and composed, but she could feel resistance in certain corners of the room. Not open resistance. Something quieter. Something harder to address. Some officers followed instructions because they respected her position. Few had reached the point of respecting her judgment. By 5 o'clock, rain began falling steadily across Charlotte. Traffic cameras showed congested intersections downtown. Event organizers requested additional assistance. Dispatch lines grew busier. The operation moved into full activation. Ava stood beside the command monitors watching updates arrive in real time. Behind her, officers hurried between workstations. Phones rang continuously. Computer screens glowed beneath fluorescent lights. Ryan approached carrying a tablet. "The congestion is worse than expected," he admitted. Ava glanced at the traffic feed. Vehicles stretched for blocks near the venue. "It is." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "You were right about moving resources early." Ava looked back toward the screens. "The goal is not being right. The goal is helping people get home safely." Ryan lowered his eyes. The answer landed harder than any criticism could have. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the city. Inside, the operation continued. For the first time that day, Ryan began seeing the difference between authority and leadership. One demanded obedience. The other earned trust. And as the evening grew darker beyond the rain-covered windows, more officers were beginning to notice the same thing. By 8 o'clock that evening, The worst of the traffic had finally begun to ease. The rain that had pounded the city for hours softened into a steady mist, turning the streetlights outside headquarters into glowing circles of gold. Inside the command center, the noise had faded as well. Phones rang less often. Dispatch screens updated at a slower pace. Officers moved through the room with tired steps, carrying empty coffee cups and stacks of completed reports. Ava stood alone near a second-floor window overlooking the parking lot. Water slid down the glass in thin silver trails, blurring the rows of patrol vehicles below. Their emergency lights were off now. Only the reflections of the building remained, stretched across the wet pavement like ribbons of color. For the first time all day, she allowed herself a slow breath. The city was settling down. Behind her, conversations drifted quietly through the room. Officers discussed shift schedules, weekend plans, and paperwork waiting to be finished. Nobody noticed Ava standing at the window. She seemed content with that. Leadership had never been about attention. It had always been about responsibility. She reached into her jacket pocket and removed a small, worn photograph. The edges had softened with age. The image showed a man in an old police uniform standing beside a patrol car from another era. His smile was calm, proud, familiar. Ava studied the photograph for a moment. Her father had served nearly 30 years in law enforcement. Growing up, she remembered waiting for him to come home after long shifts. She remembered polished boots by the front door and the sound of his radio crackling from the kitchen counter. Most of all, she remembered the advice he repeated throughout her childhood. Respect was important, he would say, but character mattered more. She smiled faintly and slipped the photograph back into her pocket. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Ava turned. Ryan stood near the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. For a second, neither spoke. The awkwardness was almost visible. Finally, Ryan stepped forward and placed 1 cup on the nearby table. "I was not sure how you take it," he admitted. "So I guessed." Ava glanced at the cup. Black. No sugar. Ryan looked embarrassed immediately. The memory clearly returned to him the same way it had returned to her. "About this morning," he began. Ava raised a hand gently, not to dismiss him, to stop him from carrying the weight any further. "It was a long day," she said. Ryan lowered his eyes. The rain tapped softly against the glass between them. "Still," he said quietly, "I should have done better." Ava nodded once. The answer was simple, honest. Enough. For several seconds, they stood watching the rain-covered parking lot in silence. No lectures. No punishment. No humiliation. Just 2 officers looking out over the city they served. Down below, a patrol unit pulled into the lot. Its headlights swept across the pavement before disappearing beneath the station awning. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled one last time beyond the clouds. Then even that sound faded away, leaving only the rain and the quiet understanding that some lessons arrived not through authority, but through grace. The following morning arrived with clear skies and cool air drifting through downtown Charlotte. Sunlight reflected from glass towers and freshly washed streets, erasing almost every trace of the previous night's storm. Inside headquarters, however, something had changed. The atmosphere felt quieter, more thoughtful. Officers who normally rushed through the hallways slowed long enough to exchange greetings. Conversations stopped when work needed attention. Small things, almost invisible things, but Ava noticed them. Leadership often revealed itself in details. By 7:30, the morning briefing room was full. Officers gathered around tables with notebooks open and coffee steaming beside them. Ryan arrived early for the first time in months. Cole sat near the front instead of the back. Megan reviewed reports while speaking with younger officers who looked relieved to have someone willing to answer questions. Ava entered carrying a stack of folders. The room immediately settled, not because she demanded silence, because people wanted to hear what came next. Ava distributed assignments and reviewed priorities for the day. Community patrols, school safety visits, neighborhood outreach meetings. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy. Just the daily work that kept trust alive between the department and the people it served. As the briefing concluded, Deputy Chief Bennett stepped into the room unexpectedly. A murmur spread through the audience. Bennett rarely attended routine meetings. He carried a small plaque beneath one arm. "Before everyone leaves," he said, "there is one more item." Officers exchanged curious glances. Bennett smiled slightly. Last night's weather operation received commendations from city leadership. Response times improved despite the conditions. Traffic incidents remained lower than projected. Community organizers specifically praised the department's professionalism. A few officers nodded proudly. Bennett continued, "Successful operations do not happen because of one person. They happen because people choose to work together." He looked toward Ava, then toward the rest of the room. That lesson is worth remembering. The room remained silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Reflective silence. Ryan felt it more strongly than most. 24 hours earlier, he had judged someone before learning a single meaningful fact about her. He had mistaken confidence for competence, familiarity for experience, position for leadership. Now the evidence stood in front of him every day. Ava never reminded anyone of their mistakes. She simply gave them opportunities to improve. Bennett placed the plaque on a nearby table. District 7 earned this together. With that, he left. Officers gradually stood and prepared for their assignments. Ryan lingered behind as others filed out. Finally, he approached Ava. "Captain," he said. Ava looked up from a report. "Yes." Ryan took a slow breath. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove I can do better." Ava studied him for a moment. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows behind her, illuminating the polished badge on her uniform. "Everybody gets that chance," she replied. "The important thing is what you do with it." Ryan nodded. No speeches. No dramatic moment. Just truth. As he walked toward the door, he noticed something he had missed on his first day. Respect was not something Ava demanded from the room. It followed her naturally because she gave it first. And for the first time since she arrived, the officers around her were beginning to understand why she had been chosen to lead them. The weeks that followed brought a different rhythm to District 7. The change was not dramatic. It happened in small moments that most people would never notice. Officers arrived a little earlier. Reports were completed with greater care. Community meetings that once felt like obligations slowly became opportunities. Trust, Ava often believed, was built the same way a city was built, one brick at a time. On a bright Friday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the station windows and filled the bullpen with warm gold light. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Officers moved between desks carrying folders and coffee cups. The place felt alive. Ava stood near a conference table reviewing outreach plans for an upcoming neighborhood event when Ryan approached carrying a thick binder. "Captain," he said. Ava looked up. "What do you have?" Ryan placed the binder on the table. "A revised community engagement proposal. The schools asked if we could expand officer visits this semester." Ava opened the binder and began turning pages. Detailed schedules, volunteer signups, transportation coordination, resource planning. Every section was organized carefully. She glanced back toward Ryan. "You put a lot of work into this." Ryan smiled slightly. "I had good examples." Ava understood what he meant. Nearby, Megan Ellis looked up from her desk and grinned. Even Cole Harris, who had once dismissed nearly every new idea that crossed his path, nodded approvingly from across the room. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had on Ava's first day. Not because people agreed on everything. Good departments never did. It felt lighter because people had learned how to listen. Later that afternoon, a group of local students arrived for a station tour. They moved through the building with wide eyes, stopping to examine patrol vehicles, communications equipment, and photographs hanging along the walls. One young girl lingered near a display case containing awards earned by former officers. She could not have been older than 10. Ava noticed her studying the photographs carefully. "Thinking about becoming a police officer someday?" Ava asked. The girl looked up and smiled shyly. "Maybe." Her eyes drifted toward the portraits of past leaders, then back toward Ava. "Do captains always know everything?" The question made several nearby officers laugh softly. Ava smiled. "No. Good captains keep learning." The girl seemed satisfied with the answer. As the tour continued, Ryan watched the exchange from a distance. Not long ago, he had judged Ava based on assumptions. Now he saw something entirely different. He saw someone who led without arrogance. Someone who corrected mistakes without humiliation. Someone who carried authority lightly because she understood it was never truly hers. It belonged to the responsibility itself. Before leaving that evening, Ryan paused outside Ava's office. Through the glass wall, he could see her working quietly beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp. Reports covered the desk. Community maps hung on the wall. The city stretched beyond the window in the fading orange light of sunset. Ryan continued down the hallway feeling something he had not expected when the week began. Gratitude. Because sometimes the most important lesson a leader teaches has nothing to do with rank. Sometimes it is simply showing people a better version of themselves. Autumn arrived quietly in Charlotte. The trees lining the streets outside District 7 had begun turning shades of amber and gold, and cool morning air drifted through the city before the first rush of traffic each day. Nearly 3 months had passed since Ava Brooks walked into the station carrying a single file box, while strangers measured her worth before learning her name. Now the building felt different. Not because the walls had changed. Not because the uniforms had changed. The people inside had. On a crisp Monday morning, Ava arrived before sunrise as she often did. The station remained mostly silent. The fluorescent lights cast a soft glow across empty desks while the city beyond the windows slowly awakened. She carried a cup of coffee and walked through the bullpen, pausing briefly beside the community outreach board near the front entrance. New photographs covered the display. Officers reading with children at local schools. Volunteers helping at food drives. Neighborhood events filled with smiling families. Small moments of connection. The kind of moments that rarely made headlines, but changed communities all the same. Ava studied the photographs for a moment before continuing toward her office. As she passed through the hallway, she noticed a familiar sound. Laughter. Not the kind that excluded people. Not the kind that divided a room. This was different. Ryan, Megan, Cole, and several younger officers stood near the briefing area sharing stories before the start of their shifts. When Ryan noticed Ava, he immediately straightened. Then he smiled. "Good morning, Captain." Others echoed the greeting. Ava returned each greeting by name. It was a small thing, yet every officer noticed. She never forgot names. Never forgot people. The morning briefing proceeded smoothly. Assignments were distributed. Questions were answered. Plans were reviewed. When the meeting ended, officers headed toward their patrol vehicles and workstations. The station gradually emptied until only a few remained. Ava gathered her notes and stepped outside. The air felt cool against her skin. Across the parking lot, the first rays of sunlight reflected from windshields and windows, covering the pavement in soft gold light. She walked toward the memorial wall standing beside the station entrance. Hundreds of names were engraved there. Officers who had served their communities across generations. Ava reached into her pocket and removed the old photograph of her father. For a moment she held it beside the memorial and looked at both. Then she smiled. Not a smile of victory, a smile of gratitude. The wind moved gently through the nearby trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. A patrol vehicle rolled out of the parking lot and disappeared into the waking city. Ava slipped the photograph back into her pocket and turned toward the station. Through the glass entrance, she could see officers beginning another day of service. People from different backgrounds, different experiences, different stories, yet now moving forward together. She opened the door and stepped inside. The sunlight followed her across the floor for just a moment before the door closed softly behind her. And in the quiet that remained, the lesson was impossible to miss. Respect can be demanded by rank, but trust is earned through character. And character, unlike authority, leaves a lasting mark long after the title is gone.